Okay, so let's dive in. We're looking at some source material today that, it really gives us a shortcut into understanding a profound cognitive difference. Specifically, how some minds perceive reality and why that very perception might make them uniquely vulnerable to manipulation.
It's a really crucial subject. So you shared these sources with us that explore something called Gestalt language processing, or GLP. It's a way of perceiving the world that's often associated with autistic minds.
Right.
And our mission for this deep dive is to get to the bottom of how this deep sort of atmospheric attunement, how it interacts with coercive personalities and even whole systems.
And the argument the sources make is just so compelling. It starts with this idea that, it never begins with a sentence. It begins with the air. I'm sure you felt this yourself, right? You walk into a room or you start a conversation, and there's just this quiet wrongness in the field before anyone's even said anything to give you proof.
That feeling is the absolute key. And to really get why that happens, we need to clarify what GLP actually is. For most people, what we'd call neurotypical, language is built up sequentially.
Like blocks.
Exactly, like Lego blocks. You learn words, then you build them into phrases and then sentences. That's analytic language processing.
But GLP is different.
Fundamentally different, yeah. GLP starts with these complete breathing fields of meaning, or scripts, things you hear and absorb as a single unit.
So the world arrives not as parts you have to assemble, but as a total configuration. Gestalt.
That's it. So your mind is reading the world as resonance first, way before it starts reading the sequence of events or words. You're tracking the emotional weather, not just the data points.
The sources call this a perceptual architecture, which I think is a great way to put it.
It is. The neurotypical mind tracks the parts and then builds the context from them. But the GLP mind, it takes in the entire emotional configuration first. It's like an immediate snapshot of the emotional geometry of the space.
Let's stick with what the sources call this distortion. They call it the tilt. You're in an interaction, and the first alarm bell isn't what someone does or says. It's the relational environment itself tilting.
Right.
The imagery they use is perfect. A conversation that feels too bright.
Yeah.
Or a smile that, just didn't settle into the room. It's this sense that the air itself is being consciously arranged for you.
And that rearrangement, that tilt, it gets registered immediately because for a GLP mind, coherence is how the world stays stable.
What do you mean by coherence?
Coherence is when intention matches the atmosphere. When the tone of what's being said actually aligns with the truth of the situation, when that alignment breaks, the whole field starts to wobble.
And when the field wobbles, the mind instinctively tries to stabilize it. Is that where this idea of echolalia comes in?
It is, and it's such a brilliant concept. It's not about mimicking sounds, but about sensing what the environment is broadcasting. So you can stabilize yourself and harmonize with that pattern.
So you're incredibly sensitive to it. You feel, what do they say, effect as pressure and tone as trajectory.
Exactly. You're basically built to seek harmony with whatever reality is being presented to you.
Which makes those warning signs almost impossible to just, ignore. It's like having a built-in seismograph for emotional shifts.
It is. The sources offer this really striking contrast. Where most people hear conversation, we hear weather.
And weather, unlike words, has no interest in being polite. I love that line.
It's perfect, isn't it? You can't argue with the atmosphere, you just feel it. And for a GLP mind, an inconsistency isn't some minor social quirk. It's a structural imbalance. It threatens the entire pattern of reality.
Okay, now this is where it gets really dangerous. This is where the manipulators come into the picture. Because that inconsistency, it's a warning sign, but it's also weirdly a magnet.
Yeah, precisely. That wobble activates a fundamental drive to complete the pattern, to find coherence. The mind instinctively reaches for resolution because that's its primary job. And this is the exact mechanism that coercive people exploit. The sources call them atmosphere engineers.
So they're not just lying with words, they're specifically engineering the environment.
They are. They manipulate not by arguing facts, but by constantly tuning and detuning the resonance of a situation. They produce signals that are just inconsistent enough to keep that coherent-seeking engine running on overdrive.
They're creating a world that won't ever settle.
Yes, which forces the GLP mind into this cycle of what the source calls coerced repatterning.
Meaning the person is constantly trying to solve an equation that the manipulator keeps changing the variables for. You mistake the intense strain of trying to understand them for the promise that you might finally succeed.
And the tragedy is, the pattern was never meant to be solved. That's the insight. As the source material puts it, the tilt is the point. That constant strain, that seeking, that's what keeps the perceptive mind engaged and trapped in their orbit.
Wow. This completely reframes how we think about gaslighting, especially for a mind that's attuned to gestalts. It doesn't start with a big, obvious lie. It starts with gestalt disruption.
The abuse is about sabotaging the entire emotional environment first.
How?
Well, the manipulator will inject cues that are inherently contradictory, like a tone of loving warmth paired with a look of pure contempt.
Or intimacy that's laced with a subtle threat.
Right. And that just scrambles the perceptive engine. The survivor stays because when a fundamental pattern collapses, your mind is built to try and restore it. You're trapped by your own drive to repair what's broken, and you don't realize the instability is the whole point. It's engineered.
Which brings us to this concept that really it flips the whole paradigm. The double empathy problem in reverse. We usually hear that autistic people struggle to read neurotypical cues, but this flips the script on where the misattunement is actually coming from.
It does. The research suggests that this misattunement is mutual. It's rooted in a fundamental mismatch of perceptual styles. The so-called deficit is actually a communication breakdown. One person, the GLP one, is reading the whole field, while the other is focused on individual parts that might be intentionally vague.
So neurotypical social norms, all that prized politeness, plausible deniability, the strategic vagueness we all use to smooth things over,
All of it.
that's exactly what the GLP mind experiences as distortion, as atmospheric noise.
Absolutely. And manipulators use that ambiguity as the perfect camouflage. They can hide their hostile intent inside polite phrases. They use vague language so they can't be held accountable.
They exploit the gap between what they said, the acceptable NT surface, and the huge atmospheric dissonance that the GLP mind feels, what they actually meant.
And the worst part is that the perceptive person is told that the shifting air they felt is irrelevant. Why? Because there's no proof you can point to in the words themselves.
And it stops being about just individual bad actors. When you realize this kind of structural ambiguity, it's often rewarded in the wider world. The sources talk about trauma by policy.
It's a powerful phrase. Because institutions can replicate these narcissistic tactics on a macro scale. They generate manufactured uncertainty. They enforce inconsistent rules. They use ambiguity as a form of currency.
Yeah, think about a workplace that values vague diplomacy over clear, honest feedback.
Or any system where the procedures are designed to contradict themselves. That's a classic one.
And the structural harm there is that the person who names the pattern, the one who says, wait, this policy contradicts that one, or the atmosphere here is hostile no matter what our mission statement says.
They're framed as the problem.
Right.
They get labeled as lacking tact or overreacting or just misreading the situation. The system itself punishes clarity and rewards strategic silence. It effectively forces a perceptive mind to doubt its own sensory truth just to stay in the system.
So how do we protect that atmospheric truth? How do you stop being trained to override the very perception that's trying to keep you safe?
The solution has to start with what the sources call epistemic justice.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means reclaiming the legitimacy and the authority of GLP perception. It means you have to validate the body's warnings as actual perception, not paranoia.
So you listen to those first sensations.
You listen, that tightening behind your ribs, that brightness that feels more like a glare, or that distinct off-key note in the atmosphere. That isn't a feeling, that's data.
That recognition alone, that the physical feeling is evidence, that must be profoundly liberating. The sources also talk about the practice of naming.
Naming is crucial. Just saying out loud, even just to yourself, this doesn't feel right, even if I can't explain why. That simple act helps stabilize the field. It anchors your perception in reality before the atmosphere engineer can totally destabilize you.
And then finally, safety grows from actively seeking out environments that have, what was the phrase? Emotional consistency.
Yes. You have to seek out people and spaces where the atmosphere holds, where communication is direct, where honesty is just, the breathable air.
Because doing that allows your body to learn, or maybe relearn, what relational safety actually feels like.
So that when the tilt does happen, the contrast is sharp and unmistakable. Protection isn't about building armor around your heart. It's about recognizing when the world stops resonating and then giving yourself permission to leave without needing external justification or conclusive proof.
At the end of the day, what we've learned here is that the core struggle isn't that a mind using Gestalt perception misses signals. It's that it perceives the whole messy truth way too honestly in a world that's often built on performance and strategic ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
And the relief, the immense relief, comes when that pattern finally clicks into place and you stop arguing with your own sensory reality.
So if the systems we live in, our workplaces, our institutions, if they so often replicate the behavior of a manipulator, privileging ambiguity and punishing clarity, then that raises a really important question for you to think about.
What's that?
When you're seeking safety, is the hardest step really cutting off an individual person? Or is it recognizing and rejecting the false coherence offered by a system that demands you ignore your own sensory truth? What does it truly look like to trust the tilt when the entire institution is insisting the ground is perfectly stable?